Imagine you're playing a game of chess. The rules are same, but the only difference? The pieces are nuclear bombs. One wrong move and poof, goes a country. All it takes is one slight miscalculation, one wrong judgment, and you go from meeting your mates to meeting your maker. What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Universal Times, where today we are looking at one of the most dangerous times of recent human history. Picture this. It's the early 1960s, a time of icy tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The world held its breath as these giants played a game of nuclear chess. Cue the Cuban Missile Crisis. After the Cold War, relations between US and USSR were more tense than me and my father when my results came out. Both knew that the other had nuclear weapons capable of snapping them out of existence, and this danger was never closer than the 13-day period of the Cuban Missile Crisis. This brings us to the first chapter of this spine-shivering story, having the title which almost does the opposite, The Bay of Pigs. In April 1961, the US very unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Fidel Castro's government in Cuba. The act was enough for Cuba to seek help from USSR, which the Soviets happily gave when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to provide military and economic aid to Cuba, including the installation of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. Now, it's surprising that the Cubans were so sneaky with all of this that by the time US got to know about the Cubans having nukes, the Soviets were practically pointing the nukes right at their noses. Now, this game of nuclear chess, which just now turned into hide and seek, this called for an emergency meeting, where military advisors suggested John F. Kennedy to strategic missile strikes on missile sites and an invasion in Cuba. Fortunately, Kennedy chose a more careful and less on-your-face approach by declaring that US will now be intercepting all shipments to Cuba. Now, as you can see, this is not really a subtle approach, as it is basically a naval blockade. Although the US called it a quarantine, which allowed basic necessities to go, the Soviets were not happy with this at all, calling it an act of war. As they said that the violation of freedom to use international waters is an act of aggression, amongst other things, and ending it with nuclear war in a letter to US. And this began the most stressful and traumatic 6 days in the recent human history. While the US demanded the removal of missiles from Cuba, both Cuba and USSR insisted that they were only defensive and that they had no intention of using them aggressively. As the weapons continued to be armed, the US, now being more agitated than ever, prepared for a possible invasion of Cuba. The whole situation was going to go over 9,000 when on October 27th, the Soviets spotted a US spy plane and shot it down. And if things could not go any worse, the same day a Soviet submarine was hit by a small depth charge from an US Navy vessel while attempting to signal it to come up. Now, just like a relationship with bad communication, the commanders on the Soviet submarine, unable to communicate with the surface, thought that the war had begun and prepared to launch a nuclear strike. However, Vasily Arkhipov, the second in command, refused to authorize the launch, and since all the commanders on the ship have to agree, the launch was cancelled. His decision not only saved the day, but perhaps the world. However, the crisis wasn't over yet. For the first time in history, the US military set itself to DEFCON 2, one step away from nuclear war. With hundreds of nuclear missiles ready to launch, the world stood on the brink. This game of nuclear chess, which was finally moving towards a stalemate, and thankfully, diplomacy carried on. In secret meetings, Attorney General Robert Kennedy met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrin in Washington, D.C. After intense negotiation, they reached a proposal. The US would remove its missiles from Turkey and Italy, and the Soviets would withdraw their missiles from Cuba under UN inspection. Once the agreement was reached, the Soviet missiles were set to be removed from Cuba. The crisis was finally over. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. This whole crisis was no different from a roller coaster ride. It had extreme ups, downs, and was perfect for a movie. 13 Days is a 2000 American historical political thriller film directed by Roger Donaldson. You should consider checking this movie out if you want to picture the urgency, suspense, and paralyzing chaos of the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is all for today's video, guys. For more videos like this, make sure to like this video so that we know you want more, and maybe even dive deeper into the Bay of Pigs. Till then, keep watching Universal Times.